Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Happy Friday. And welcome to week 9, part 9 of our 13-part series of what's new in SQL Server 2012. Probably some of you attending have attended prior weeks, and for some of you this might be the first week, so thank you all for coming either way. And this week we're going to look at the new capabilities in PowerPivot 2.0 that are part of SQL Server 2012. And we'll get into the demo in just a few minutes here. My name is Kevin Goff. I'm a Microsoft SQL Server MVP. I actually train for a company called SetFocus. They are a Microsoft certified partner for learning solutions out of Parsippany, New Jersey. And I'm the SQL Server Business Intelligence Practice Manager and trainer, so I'm sort of a player coach there. And just a few introductions. First of all, like I said, this is a 13-part series about new features in SQL Server 2012. I've attended a lot of demos over the years and certainly been speaking for a number of years, and I've always felt very strongly in very detailed demos, in a just the facts approach to demonstrations of new functionality and software. So after a few introductory slides, going to get right into the specifics, in this case in a PowerPivot 2.0. Now, a little bit about me. First of all, you can pull down this slide deck, obviously through the interface here. You can also pull it down from my website, which is down here at the bottom. It's www.kevinsgoff.net. I actually have a location on my website, on my blog, devoted to these webcasts. On the right-hand side of my site, there's a separate category called Microsoft Webcasts that you can go to pull down the slides. So again, that's just www.kevinsgoff.net. If you want to drop me an email, my email address is kgoff@kevinsgoff.net. And again, I'm a Microsoft SQL Server MVP. I've been involved in writing a couple of books. I train for a company called SetFocus. I do a lot of speaking, primarily at community events like SQL Saturday and SharePoint Saturday and some Code Camp events, mainly in the Mid-Atlantic. I'm actually out of central Pennsylvania. And I mentioned I train for a company called SetFocus. We actually offer over 100 hours of free training lifted from our curriculum weeks in areas of .NET, SQL Server, Business Intelligence, and SharePoint. So if you have any interest in checking out our free training portal, simply go to freetraining.setfocus.com. And there's a sign-on area. It's completely free. You just have to sign on with a valid email address, and then you can get access to over 100 hours of free training. It's actually lifted from our curriculum. And if you have more detailed training needs in any of those technology areas, feel free to contact us. So we are in week 9 of our 13-part series. We've gone over new T-SQL enhancements. We've gone over the new columnstore index. We looked at integration services. We looked at the tabular model in analysis services. And now we're going to turn our attention to PowerPivot. Now, PowerPivot is not a new concept. It actually existed prior to SQL Server 2012. This is a brand new version, and as you'll see if you know anything about the previous version, it's a greatly enhanced version. Now, we are actually in part 1 of a 2-part series. We just did a mini part 1 and mini part 2 on the analysis services tabular model back on the weeks of May the 4th and May the 11th in weeks. Okay, folks, sorry for the delay. First time for everything. I've had this laptop for going on 2 years. Great laptop. Actually locked on me for the very first time. So I guess first time for everything here. So as I said, this is the first in a two-part segment within this 13-part series on new features in PowerPivot 2.0. And I'm going to talk just for a minute about PowerPivot 2.0, and then we're going to get into the actual presentation. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, I don't know if this was actually captured in the audio, PowerPivot is not a new product with respect to SQL Server 2012. PowerPivot actually was released, the first version was released back in the late spring of 2010, along with it actually coincided with the release of SQL Server 2008 R2. Now, PowerPivot is an interesting product. It can take a while just to explain what it does, because it is rather unique and rather special. It provides power users and even some moderately accomplished end users with the ability to create analytic databases using Excel. Now, many of you out there are probably application developers, maybe database administrators, and you might be wondering, all right, why are we listening to a presentation about a tool that's going to be used by power users and by some regular corporate business users? Well, the answer is that even though this tool is intended to be used to gain a certain level of independence and productivity on the part of power users, there are still some development aspects to this. There are still some areas where developers are going to be required, and there might even be some training opportunities either in a company or even for a contractor or a consultant. I can speak from personal experience. I've had training opportunities on a contract basis, just training people on how to use PowerPivot. So even though it's more of a power user tool than necessarily a hardcore developer tool, it's still something that developers should be aware of. It's something developers are still going to get involved with, possibly just from different angles. Now, you might have heard the term, if you've been following this particular area, you might have heard the term self-service BI. Essentially, what this means is that the power users in a company can take some relational data or some data store in a company, maybe not necessarily an analytic database, and create some self-service or some departmental BI that's specific to their workflow or maybe to the workflow of a department within a company. So it's good for maybe for one person looking at their segment of the data, or maybe for a small or medium-sized department. So it's an alternative for small analytic databases. Now, by small, I mean that the total size of an individual PowerPivot spreadsheet cannot be any greater than 2 gigabytes. So it's going to work fine for some scenarios, and obviously it's not intended to serve as a full-blown replacement for a larger OLAP cube that might serve an entire company. Now, there are some features in PowerPivot that we're going to see here today that certainly parallel some of the features in the tabular model that we saw over the last 2 weeks. So as we go through this demo, some of the things that we're going to see are actually going to remind us of what existed in the tabular model. However, there are some features that aren't in PowerPivot that we're going to see, or that we're not going to see, I should say. There's no support for any type of partitioning. There's no built-in security roles. There's no support for things like rollup or direct query. So we simply have PowerPivot storage, and there's only one storage model, and we really can't change that. But despite those limitations, so long as it fits within the capacity of a set of users, we can do some pretty special things with this. This essentially allows people to mash up data from different sources and create the equivalent of a star schema relationship between fact tables and dimension tables, or maybe just between master tables and transaction tables, and create relationships. Some people term this one big VLOOKUP. And as you'll see with some of the demos we're going to look at, it might remind you of one big VLOOKUP. Now, as I said, this is similar to the tabular model in that the users can take the data, create relationships, create calculations, create KPIs, create hierarchies. Now, end users are going to be able to do some of this, but they're going to need help with other areas. For instance, some of the calculations and some of the KPIs might involve a little bit of programming, and that might be beyond what even a power user can handle. So there's still areas for developers in here. Now, this utilizes, because I've talked about Vertipack, or what's now XVelocity, this utilizes the Vertipack engine under the hood. So that same column store index, that same data storage methodology that I was talking about in prior weeks is actually used under the hood by PowerPivot. Now, PowerPivot has two components to it. There are two general aspects of PowerPivot. One is the free Excel component. PowerPivot itself is actually a free add-on that you can utilize with Excel 2010. And it has to be Excel 2010. This will not work with Excel 2007. So there's a free component that end users can utilize in conjunction with any data storage area, and essentially create PowerPivot content that can be shared across a file share by end users. So end users with nothing more than Excel 2010 and the free PowerPivot add-on and some access to some data storage area, whether it's a relational database or maybe a data mart or a data warehouse, can use the Excel component. Now there's a second component. I'm going to talk about this a little bit this week. I'm going to talk about it more in detail next week. There's a SharePoint integration component. Essentially, end users can take PowerPivot content and deploy it up to a SharePoint site collection so that other users can interact with it and even create reports off of the PowerPivot content up in SharePoint. There's definitely some integration points involved in setting that up, although you can do some pretty creative things with it once we get PowerPivot content up into SharePoint. I'm going to show a little bit of that at the end of the day today and then more next week. So once deployed, end users can access PowerPivot content through such tools as the new reporting capability in SQL Server 2012 called PowerView. You can also access PowerPivot content using reporting services and other tools like performance point services inside of SharePoint. So once we have PowerPivot content deployed, there's several things we can do with it. Now the scenarios for PowerPivot, there are certainly many scenarios that exist. One of them might be where there's no formal corporate BI presence. Maybe there's nothing more than different relational databases or possibly a synthesized data mart, but maybe no formal BI application. And so end users can utilize PowerPivot with Excel to create mashups of data for maybe their segment or their workflow. Or maybe PowerPivot is used as a supplement for existing corporate BI solutions where maybe there's some ad hoc or some one-off analytic scenarios that maybe a small group of users or a department might need that's not satisfied by the current corporate BI solution. So it can be used to supplement existing BI applications. This is not a replacement for a full-blown analysis services solution. This is either a supplement or maybe a smaller solution for maybe a segment within a company. Now, jumped too far ahead there. Now I'm going to get into
Kevin, I don't think we're seeing your slide flips there. I'm still on scheduled presentations. Maybe you haven't taken over as presenter?
You see it now?
I'm still seeing scheduled presentations.
Okay, hold on just a second. You know what I think when I came in and that slide deck was in there, I think I was just sharing it privately. So here we go.
Oh, okay. There we go. We're waiting for it to come in.
Okay, folks, we'll be getting to the demo in just a second here. Okay, so what I just talked about looks like the slide deck wasn't actually up. What I just mentioned is in the bullet points here that you can obviously pull down from the presentation. So again, it's good for personal BI and small departmental BI solutions. There's two components to it. We're going to focus on the first component today and more the second component next week, where we can integrate PowerPivot content with SharePoint. So going to actually get to the demonstration here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take essentially the same demonstration I did last week for a fictional book publisher and recreate it using PowerPivot here today. So some of the steps are going to seem very similar, except we're going to be doing it under the control of Excel. So I'm going to take some data, going to build some relationships with it, going to define some measures and calculations, going to define some hierarchies, going to build a KPI, going to look at perspectives, going to look at some basic DAX expressions. DAX is the programming language that we can use inside of PowerPivot, and going to create multiple worksheets based upon a single PowerPivot model. And we're also going to look at bridge table relationships. We're going to look at where the built-in relationship capabilities in PowerPivot work fine, and where we need to write a little bit of code to make things happen. So I'm actually going to jump to my desktop now. So I'm going to share my desktop here in just a second. So again, apologize for the little glitches up to this point. Hopefully everything will be smooth sailing from this point on. So, okay, hopefully everybody can see my desktop.
We can see it.
Okay, I'm going to launch Management Studio, and I'm actually going to take a look at the relational database on which we're going to build PowerPivot content. So I'm going to wait for Management Studio to launch here. This will take just a second. And I'm going to pull up a database that I've built. And we're going to create, as I said, a PowerPivot content database off of this relational database. So just waiting for Management Studio to launch here. Because I rebooted my my entire laptop, might take a second or two for things to load here. Okay, here we go. So appreciate everybody sticking with me here. Okay, I'm going to connect to my local instance of SQL Server 2012. And I have a database out here. And the database is called Book Sales DM, short for Book Sales Data Mart. And there are a series of tables in here. Now, this has been constructed ahead of time in a more or less schema, data mart or data warehouse relationship model. So I've got a series of business dimensions here and a couple of different fact tables. Well, I'm not going to go through all the data right now. We'll sort of discover the data as we go along. But basically in here we have a list of authors. We have a list of books and a list of book prices. So we have some historical instances of the prices of the book. A book might sell now at $49.95, and then maybe it goes up to $54.95 the following year. And we might want to look at the history of sales, maybe the sales and the returns when the book was one price versus another. Now, in some instances, you might see that denormalized into one table. I've actually just broken it out into two tables, just to be different here. And we have a list of basic customers that we sell books to. If I just simply take a look at some of the data in here, we have some standard bookstores, some internet customers, some distribution centers. So I've got people in here like Amazon and Baker and Taylor and Bookpool. Some of these might not exist any longer, or Baytree Bookstore or Barnes and Noble. So we've got customers broken out by internet and retail store and by college bookstore and so forth. And as I said, we have a list of books. We have about 600 or 700 different book titles, the authors for the books, and the history of the book prices. We also have a date dimension of calendar dates over the course of a couple of years. If I actually take a look at this, I've got a date dimension built ahead of time where we have the actual date for every day over a 5-year, actually I'm sorry, over a 3-year period from 06 to 08. I actually have the corresponding Saturday date, the month and the quarter associated with the date. We also have a month key and a quarter key because we want to display the months, but we want to sort based upon the chronological order. So we certainly wouldn't want to order the month description by month description because April and August would pop to the top of the list. We have an underlying month key that's going to be sorted using the year and the 2-digit month. Same thing for the quarter, and then nice versions of the dates. So we have the dates formatted in a nice fashion. We also have a state dimension of just basically the states of the country so we can look at sales geographically. And then we have a couple of fact tables. We have a fact table for sales, and we have a fact table for returns. And this is basically sales history and returns history by a couple of different business dimensions. So if I take a look at fact book sales, we have sales by state, by customer, by date, by the sales type, because we might sell some books as a hard copy and some as a PDF. And we have the instance of the book price. We're not storing the book PK. We're storing the instance of the book price. Again, we want to track the history associated with the price of the book at the time of the sale. And then we also have a fact table for returns, and that has a similar dimensionality. It's by state, by customer, by date, and by book price. And we have things like the returns dollars and the returns quantity. So this data is actually synthesized. The original data might have been down at the sales order transaction level. We've synthesized it by state, by customer, by date, and by book price. So maybe someone has gone to the trouble to summarize this data down to that level of dimensionality. But the question is, what can we do with it from here? Or what can end users do with it without necessarily needing to run to a developer every 5 minutes just to get data out of here? Well, that's what we're going to use PowerPivot for. Now, some of these relationships are direct. The relationship between customer and sale is direct. Some of the relationships are slightly indirect. There's no book here, but there's an instance of a book price PK. So we can look at sales by book through a relationship off the book price. But some of the relationships are a little bit greater distance, like the list of authors. We don't sell an author, we sell the author's book. Well, we have a bridge table up here that lists every book, the corresponding author, and the author's share of the book. Keep in mind that an author can write multiple books, and a book can be written by multiple authors. So on my first book, for instance, I wrote about 80% of it, and a friend of mine wrote 20%. On the second book I was involved with, I wrote 15%, another author wrote 15%, and the main author wrote whatever percent was left. So we might have multiple authors on a book where we want to store the author's share, the author's contribution toward the book, along with the author royalty. Well, if I take a look at that table, well, we have the book title PK, the author PK, the author's share. Now, in many instances it's 100%, but if I scroll down, there are a couple of rows in here where there are multiple authors on a book. And for simplicity's sake, I've made the royalty 25%. Now, the only other thing in here is we might want to have some type of a performance metric of returns with respect to sales. Well, we have a threshold of returns. And the threshold of the returns, or the returns percent, is by customer category and year. For instance, for Internet customers in the year 2006, we might want our returns to be no greater than 13.5%. And in 07, maybe 13.9%. So we have a KPI, we're going to have a key performance indicator for the returns percent that's going to have its goal read out of a fact table here. So we've got this data. What can we do with PowerPivot? Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to launch Excel, the world's most famous business intelligence tool. And as I said a little while ago, it's not my intention to teach people Excel. You're all developers in some different development tool. But the big question here is how might end users take advantage of this, and where might developers have to help end users along the way? Now, because I had bombed out of here earlier, I had some spreadsheets I wrote, but I'm going to close that because I don't need anything. Now, in Excel, I have a drop down here for PowerPivot. This is because I have PowerPivot installed on my local machine. Well, I'm going to go to the PowerPivot window. And that launches the PowerPivot add-on that's part of Excel. Right now, you can sort of think of this as the basement of Excel. We're in the basement of this spreadsheet, and we're going to actually create some PowerPivot content in here. So I'm going to select the option from database. Now, before I continue, there are many different sources that we can use to create PowerPivot content. It would take several weeks just to go through all the different sources. We can create PowerPivot content from SQL Server databases, from Access, from analysis services. We can create it from data feeds, from text files, from other data sources, and they're listed here. We can create it from Oracle or from Teradata or from other ODBC or OLEDB sources. Again, it would take quite a while to go through all the different ones. I'm actually going to utilize the relational database I was just in a minute ago, but the point is that we can create PowerPivot content from a variety of sources. Now, as you can imagine, the better shaped the original data is, the easier it's going to be to work with relationships. If we pull in data from text files or from spreadsheets, we might have to create quite a few relationships manually. But because we're pointing to a database that already has some primary key, foreign key relationships in it, it's going to be relatively easy. So I'm going to take the option from database and from SQL Server, and I'm going to connect to my local relational database engine, the same one that I was in Management Studio for a minute ago. And just wait for it to discover the list of available databases. I'm going to pick my local instance of SQL Server 2012, and I'm going to pick that book sales data mart. So an end user would obviously have to know at least what server and what database to use, unless a connection had been created ahead of time. Now I'm going to decide what tables I want to pull in. I'm going to pull in most of the tables, but not necessarily all of them. So let me stretch this out a little bit. Now I want to pull in the fact sales table, and I also want to pull in fact return thresholds. I also want to pull in fact book returns because I want to actually create the KPI for the returns with respect to sales. I'm going to leave behind the evaluations. I'll leave that for another day. I want to look at data by state, by sales type, certainly by date, by customer, by the book price and book tables, by author, and I also want to bring in the bridge table. So those are the tables I'm going to bring in. Now, notice how there are two views in here. I'm actually going to leave them behind. I'm going to pretend like I'm not aware of these. So I'll take Finish. Now this is actually reading in the data from those tables into the basement of Excel. I use that term loosely, but that's bringing them into the basement of this Excel spreadsheet. So this might very much remind you of what we did with the tabular model, and it is also, at least some of the steps are similar to how we might build an analytic database using the full-blown version of analysis services. So that brought in all 11 tables, brought in the rows, brought in 350-some thousand rows of sales. You can bring in 20, 30 million rows and have it happen in less than a minute. All right, I'll close this. Again, if you remember from the weeks of looking at the tabular model, we see something very similar here. We see the list of tables down at the bottom. Now, if everybody can bear with me 1 second, I'm going to toggle back and forth between some screens here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. All right, so this actually lists the tables at the bottom that I pulled in. Now, what can we do from here? Well, I'm going to go to the date dimension first, because there's a little bit of surgery that we want to do here. We want the end users to be able to look at data by quarter and by month, and obviously by week ending date and year and so forth. Well, we want the user to point to the month description, but we want it to sort it on the hood based upon the month key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the month description. Anybody who used PowerPivot 1.0 will be happy to see this. There is the ability to define in the back to the home area here. There's the ability to define up in the home area the sort by column. In the home tab, there's a series of options at the top here, and one of them is to define the sort by column. So I'm going to go to the sort by column, and I'm going to tell it that the month description is going to be sorted based upon the month key. And so that way, when end users look at data by the month description, it'll be sorted under the hood based upon the month key. Same with the quarter description. I'm going to go to the sort by column, and I'm going to tell that to sort by the underlying quarter key. Now, I actually want to do the same thing for the short weekend and for the short actual date. I want to use those for display purposes, but obviously I don't want to sort based upon that because, again, it would sort alphabetically, and we get April and August at the top of the list. So I will go to the sort by column once again, and that short weekend will be based upon the week ending date, and the short actual date will be based upon the actual date. So I've defined the columns I want to use for display purposes as far as how they're going to be ordered. Now the other thing I can do in here, I might not want the end user to see things like the date or the actual date or the weekend date or the month key or the quarter key. I might only want them to look at the descriptions. Well, what I can do here for each one is I can right click on the date key, and in the shortcut menu I can basically say to hide that from client tools. Same thing here for the actual date, because again we've got the short actual date that we can use, so we can hide that from the client tools. Same thing with the weekend date. Now, I'm only going to do this for this dimension. Obviously you can see how this will work in other dimensions. Same thing with the month key. Same thing with the quarter key. So the end user, when they look at data, will see the month description, the quarter description, the year, the short weekend date, and the short actual date. So we'll have a nice, pleasant view of the dimension for the end user, or the end user can obviously create this for themselves. Now, other things that we can do. I'm going to go to the Factbook Sales table. And in Factbook Sales, this is our main sales table. We have a column called Sales Dollars. I'm going to want users to be able to roll this up. So I'm going to go to the Sales Dollars, and there's a drop down for Auto Sum, and I want to indicate that we want to have an Auto Sum column. So the Sales Dollars will automatically be aggregated anytime someone uses this in a pivot table in Excel, and we even get the total amount here. Well, then I'll go to Factbook Returns. And for Factbook Returns, I'll click on the Return Dollars, and I'll auto-sum that as well. So these are the measures that someone might want to sum up. Now, I need to go to my relationship area. At some point before the end user starts utilizing this, we want to go to the relationship area and make sure that users can look at these measures by the related dimensions. So up in the toolbar, I'm going to go to the diagram view. And I'm going to try to minimize or try to zoom this in so we can see more information. And I'm going to do just a quick facelift here on the relationship so I can get the fact tables in the middle. So there's our list of books. There's our list of authors. Here's our bridge table. Here is our book price table. And I'll get the fact tables more or less in the middle here. Get customers here at the top. Get states here at the top as well. Get dates down toward the bottom. And I see that I've got a number of relationships already set here, but not necessarily all of them. Okay, I've got everything in one screen here. Well, we're going to be able to look at Factbook Sales by customer, by book price, and therefore by book. We'll also be able to look at it by date because those are directly related to the sales table. Same thing with Factbook Returns. So if I had a higher resolution here, I could obviously do more with the diagram, but essentially because the underlying database had the primary key foreign key relationships between these fact tables and these dimension tables, well, those relationships come in here into PowerPivot. Now there's one here that I brought in where there are no existing relationships. This is the return thresholds. We ultimately want to compare returns percent to the threshold to see if we're above or below the threshold. Well, the dimensionality here is a little bit different. Unlike the Factbook Returns and Factbook Sales tables, which were by customer, Fact Return Thresholds is by customer category and by year. Well, we don't have a prayer of being able to line up a returns percent by customer and category and year and compare it to this threshold table unless we have some common relationships. So what I will try to do here is drag the customer category over to the customer category over in dim customers. And we're actually going to get an error message here, and that's to be expected. That's because customer category is neither a primary key nor a candidate to be a primary key in that customer table. Now, the full-blown version of analysis services, when you're creating multidimensional OLAP databases, will be a little bit more forgiving here. It'll actually allow us to create the equivalent of an internal index on customer category. Unfortunately, here with PowerPivot and also with a tabular model, we actually can't do that. Now, if you recall back in Management Studio, there were two views that I left behind here. They were VDIM customer and VDIM customer category and VDIM year. They are a unique list of the categories and the years. They're basically select distincts from the customer table and from the date dimension. So I need to get those views into here. I intentionally left them out to show how we could actually get them back. Well, the question is, how do we get back into that list of tables? Well, we might look up at the top here to see if there's any ability to go into existing connections. We see that there is an existing connection in here. Well, that was the connection to the book sales database. Well, we can reopen that and pull from the list of tables. Now, it doesn't check off the tables that we originally had. It'd be nice if it did. That way it'd be obviously clear which ones that it already selected. But I can pick the two views that I had left behind and take Finish. So it's always good to know how we can add things in after the fact, because we seldom get all the tables in right on the first try, and even if we do, there are always new tables that might be added down the road. So I'll close this, and now those two views come in. Now let me get them into the screen here, get them into the mix. So I've essentially brought in two views that serve as sort of mini dimensions for the customer and for the list of dates for just the category and the year. So what I'll do here is I'll take the year from fact return thresholds and drag it into the year here, and that creates a relationship. Now I also need to drag, because I'm ultimately going to want to look at sales by different time periods. I also want to take that year and drag that up here as well. So that needs to be a common dimension. And then I'll do the same thing with customer category. I'll drag the customer category from fact return thresholds into this mini dimension. So this is a demonstration that even though PowerPivot is for end users or for power users, developers still might need to be around, if nothing more than for training purposes, to show people how to build these things. Not every data mart or even every departmental database is going to be a pure star schema format. Sometimes you're going to have these unusual relationships, even in smaller databases. And then I'll do the same thing with customer category. I'll drag customer category. Actually, I just did that here. Now I'm going to drag customer category from dim customers over to the customer category here. And that's going to allow us to be able to look at returns percentages with respect to a return threshold. All right, well, enough of this diagramming. Let's actually see a few results here, even though we're certainly not finished. Well, I want to go back up to the first floor. I mentioned that we're in the basement of the Excel spreadsheet right now. I want to go back up to the first floor. I want to go back up to Excel. Well, I'm going to insert a pivot table. And I'm going to do it into the current, I'm going to create a new worksheet. Now I'm going to go down to Factbook Sales, and I see that aggregation for sum of sales dollars. Now in reality, I probably wanted to hide some of these other keys. We saw in the date dimension how we could hide other columns, so obviously the same thing would apply here. And I'll check the sum of sales dollars. And that's automatically $281 million. Now, by the way, this is a fictional number. This is not an actual number. This is made-up sales data. That's rolling up the sales dollars from the 300 and some thousand rows. Well, let me come up to the customer dimension, and let me take a look at this by customer name. Well, there's the sales broken out by all the different customers. Well, I also want to look at the return dollars. So I'll come down to Factbook Returns, and I'll check the checkbox for the sum of the return dollars. So there's the other returns. We have 281 million sales and 33 million in returns. If you ever worked in any kind of retail, you know that that returns are the bane of anybody who works in the retail area. The returns percentages are sometimes as important, if not more important, than profitability. Well, other things that we can do here in Excel as an end user. There's the ability, notice how in this pivot table field list we have the ability to create slicers. These are like visual filters. Well, watch this. I'm going to go up to the date dimension. So I'll go up to dim dates. And notice how we have just the nice version of the columns that we created when we were in the date dimension a little while ago. I'm going to take the year and I'm going to make it a horizontal slicer. This is what happens. It actually puts the years up at the top. And maybe I want to look at this just for the year of 2007. Notice how the data auto-sliced automatically. We've created, it's important to stop here, even with this simple example, to see what we've done. We've actually created an analytic database that's compressed and is sitting in the basement of this Excel spreadsheet. It's part of the spreadsheet. When I say in the basement, I mean that somewhat loosely, but it is a segment within the Excel spreadsheet where the data from the tables we brought in has been loaded and compressed. So it's actually part of the sheet. If I were to save this spreadsheet to my local drive right now, it would actually save a compressed version of the data. Now let me bring another slicer into here. I have a customer category. I'll put that in the horizontal slicer as well. Maybe I want to look at this just by internet customers. And so we have a much smaller list here. All right, well, now we want to show our returns percent. We want to always calculate the return dollars with respect to the sales dollars. Here we need a little bit of DAX code. DAX is the programming language that's used for PowerPivot. DAX is sort of a hybrid of the Excel language with something that looks somewhat like MDX, the programming language we use for OLAP databases. Now, DAX can be pretty simple for basic calculations, can be a little bit more complicated for more complex calculations. Sometimes developers are going to be needed to write DAX code. Well, we're going to put in a DAX formula. So I'm actually going to go back to the PowerPivot content. So I'll go back to the PowerPivot content in here. And I'm going to go back and look at the fact tables. So I'm going to go back to the data view of things. And I want to actually look at Factbook sales. And apologize, I've actually, to get the bottom of the screen up, I have to flip some things around here. Here we go. So I'll go to Factbook sales, and I see that I've got the sum of sales dollars here. Well, I want to use that in a calculation with respect to Factbook returns. Now I could put the calculation in either fact table, but conceptually it belongs here. Now I actually had some DAX code put out in a text file ahead of time, so I wouldn't have to rekey it. And so I've got in Notepad here some existing calculations I'm going to bring in, and one of them is the returns percent. Essentially, what I want to do is I want to take the sum of returns dollars from Factbook returns, and I want to divide that by the sum of sales dollars from Factbook sales. This is actually DAX code. Now I want to round it to 4 decimals. And I also want to take the absolute value, and here's why. The returns actually show as a negative, and I want this returns percent to show as a positive, so that's why I'm taking the absolute value. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPivot content here, and below the sum of returns dollars, I'm going to go up to the formula editor up here, and I'll click the drop down, and I'm going to paste in that formula. The returns percent, and we have colon equals, which indicates everything to the right here is an expression. And I'll just simply hit enter, and there's my returns percent. Well, I want to always format that as a percent, so I'll click the apply percent format. So that's being rendered as a percent. Now, what I'm going to do is I will go back to the Excel spreadsheet. So I'll go back up to the first floor here. And notice how it says over in the pivot table field list, the PowerPivot data was modified. And it's prompting me to refresh because I need to get that returns percent as part of Factbook returns. So I'll take refresh, and I now see the returns percent is available. Well, I'll click that, and now we get the returns percent. So we now see the returns percent for each customer inside of Internet for the year 2007. Well, we have that threshold, and it's by customer category and by year. And so I want to bring that in and also create a KPI. Well, I'll come back to the underlying content here. This will cooperate with me. And I'm going to go over to the threshold area. Now we have thresholds again by year and by customer category. Well, I want to create a general calculation. Come back to Notepad here. I'm going to create a general calculation on that returns threshold. And I want to apply it, in this case, to customers and to years. So I want to basically have a returns goal. So I'm going to copy this formula. So this returns goal, where we're going to calculate the average of the return thresholds across customers and across time periods. Now we're getting into some more involved DAX code right now. We're kind of in a tough situation because we need to look at some DAX code in order to see what PowerPivot can do. But by the same token, we also have to look at what's involved with DAX code. In 2 weeks, we're actually going to devote an hour just to looking at DAX code and nothing else. Well, I'm going to copy this, and I will go back to my content database here. And I'm going to actually put that formula in. So that's going to be my returns goal. And I will format that as a percent as well. Well, now I'll go back to the Excel spreadsheet. And once again, Excel detects that there was an underlying change. Well, I'm going to refresh this. And now in the threshold table, we actually see the returns goal. Well, I'll check that. Well, the returns goal for 07 for Internet is 13.9%. If I go to distribution centers, it's actually 15.5%. And if I switch years, if I go back to 06, it's a different percent. So we have a returns goal that's scoped to the customer category and to the year. Well, now we can build a key performance indicator. We can actually do this here in Excel, and we're going to pit that returns percent with respect to the goal. Now we want to be below the goal, so we'll have a rule that if we're below the goal, that's good. If we're maybe just slightly above the goal, that's okay, and if we're well above the goal or the threshold, that's not good. So once again, actually come back here into the content database, and I'm going to create a KPI, and I'm going to do it with respect to the return percent. So I will come back to my fact table for the returns percent, And I'm going to construct a KPI on that returns percent. So I will go up to the content area, to the toolbar at the top. I'm going to create a KPI off of this content. So I'm building a KPI off the returns percent. I'm going to compare it to the returns goal. Now with a KPI, sometimes higher is better, sometimes lower is better. I'm going to actually change the target here because I want lower to be better. So long as we are, let me slide the filters here. So long as we are at 100% or below of the threshold, so lower is better here, that's good. If we are within 5% above the threshold, that's okay, or that's a warning. And anything above that is not good. Now, if you build full-blown KPIs in analysis services, you know that there's an MDX editor where you can put in MDX code. Any logic, any procedure logic, you'd have to abstract out back into the DAX code for the calculations. Well, I'll take OK here, and I've now established a KPI. Well, I will once again go back to my spreadsheet. And I'm going to refresh the data. And now if I go take a look at fact return thresholds, or excuse me, fact returns, I've got the KPI for the returns percent. Well, I'm already showing the value, which is the percent itself. I want to actually take a look at the status. Well, I visually get a status here. In the case of Amazon books, the goal was 13%, and we're at 14.29. That's slightly off the target, so that's a yellow. And Baytree is 14.75. That's further off the goals, so that's a red. If I go to the distribution centers, well, the threshold here is 15.5, and everybody is below that, so that's obviously a good thing. So we can build a KPI and have the target be a hardwired number or something that comes out of a fact table. So that's a capability that we have here in PowerPivot. Now notice how we get a message up here saying relationship may need to be added. I'll get back to that in just a second. There is a reason that's coming up, and we'll see why in just a moment. Now I want to do one other thing here, and by the way, since we started a little bit late, normally this goes from 12 to 1, probably going to finish here at about 1:15, maybe 1:20. So apologize for the late start because of the technical difficulties we had, but probably about 15 or 20 minutes remaining here. Well, I'm going to come back to Internet, and I'm going to sort these by the returns percent. So I'm going to click the row label drop down, and I'm going to go to the more sort options, and I'm going to sort this in descending order by the returns percent. So obviously the people with the worst returns percent are at the top. So being number one here is not necessarily a good thing. Well, we might want to put a rank number out here. Well, coming back to the DAX code that I had, a bit down further here, I actually have some DAX code that's going to do a returns rank. Now, ranking in DAX can be a little bit tricky. First of all, if we take a look back at the spreadsheet itself, we want to be certain that we only rank the rows where we have customers. We don't want to rank that grand total row. So we have to put some logic into a rank to make sure that we actually have a customer in the scope. So back in the actual formula here, we have a check ahead of time before we even do a rank to make sure that the count of the number of rows from the customer dimension is greater than 1, else we're just going to show a blank for the rank. And we also are checking to see if the current customer name is blank or not. So we have two checks ahead of time if the customer name is 1 or if the current customer name is blank or not. If either case is true, we're just going to return a blank. Otherwise, we're going to use a function called rankx. Rankx is a formula that's in DAX. It's actually a function that's in DAX, and we're going to rank by that returns percent across all the customers. So I'm going to copy and paste this formula. So I'll come back into my content database here. And I'll put the rank in the same returns percent area. So I'll paste in the code. And let me even capitalize that so it looks a little bit more proper form. So we've got returns rank. So that's now a calculation within this content database. Now, right now it's returning a blank because there's no customer to rank. But now if I go back to the spreadsheet, this will cooperate with me, and once again refresh the data. Well, now we have the returns rank, and I'll check that. And now we have the ranking from 1 to 10. So in just a little bit more than 30 minutes worth of work, we've actually created a small reporting application here. Now, I want to create a second sheet here, and I want to look at sales by author, keeping in mind that there wasn't a relationship involving author. So we're going to see where basic star schemas break down, even in a fairly simple application. Certainly sales by authors sales by books, and then the relationships to authors. That's certainly not a complicated database, but it's one where PowerPivot requires a little bit of DAX code in order to work properly. I'm going to come to another sheet here. Now, I'm not labeling the sheets at the bottom. I've just got sheet 4 here. If I want to rename this, I could rename this and simply call it returns, and come down to sheet 1 and right click and rename that and call this authors. If I could spell. Now, how do I actually get that pivot table field list here if I'm in a separate sheet? Well, what I can do is up in the main menu, I can go to the data area, go to existing connections, and I can pull in that existing PowerPivot content database. And I'll create a pivot table. And I'm going to once again look at sales dollars. And I'm going to look at it by author. So I'm going to go to the author dimension, and I have a column called author full name. Now, first of all, these are just made-up names of authors. It's just author 009, author 1009 for the first and last name. These are just dummy names. But we get a problem right away. The sum of the sales dollars is the same. Here's the problem. Unlike the full-blown version of analysis services, if I go back to the relationship area here in the content database and take a look at the diagram view, even though we're able to slice sales by book, and even though there's a relationship between books and authors through this bridge table, unfortunately the engine that works with this PowerPivot content database doesn't have the ability to slice the sales dollars by the author, at least not directly. And plus which, we get an author share. Just because a book sold $1 million doesn't mean that the author was responsible for all $1 million. Maybe the author only wrote 10% of it. Well, again, in the full-blown version of analysis services, we could actually equate sales by authors with very little code. It actually supports many-to-many bridge table relationships. This one doesn't support it directly. Here's where we need a little bit of DAX code. So I'm going to come back to my code here. Well, up above, I've got a column here called author dollars. And essentially what I want to do for each author is I want to calculate the sum of sales dollars, applying it to the author's share through the related dimension, which is dim book price. This is certainly not something that's necessarily in the mainstream, although as PowerPivot gets more and more popular and more people look at bridge table relationships, these types of calculations become a little bit more apparent. essentially, if I want to calculate the author dollars, I need to sum the sales dollars in FactBook sales and multiply it by the author share for the related dimension, which is dim book price. Well, dim book price, if we go back to the relationship area, dim book price is a little bit more visible into the calculation to the authors. So I'm going to go back to the data view, and I'm going to go to the FactBook sales table, and I'm going to create this separate calculation. So come back to Notepad here, and I'm going to copy and paste in this author dollars. Go back to the content database, and I'm going to actually paste in this calculation. So that'll be my calculation for author dollars. And need to put the colon up here, so it's actually colon equals. Make sure I get the calculation right there. Now, that should equal the sales dollars if I'm not breaking up any author. If it were a different number, we'd have a problem. Well, I'll format that as currency. And I will come back to the database, excuse me, to the spreadsheet itself. Mouse pad is really behaving strangely here. I'm going to have to tab back over manually. And I'm going to refresh my PowerPivot data again. And I'm going to go down to FactBook sales, and there's the author dollars. Well, let's take a look at that. Well, unlike some of the sales dollars, which didn't slice correctly by author, if I utilize that calculation, notice how the author dollars is being displayed for only those authors who actually had sales. Now, if I scroll down to the bottom here, the grand total is still 281,112,000. So I can actually get rid of the sum of the sales dollars. Now I have the correct number. But we also had that royalty figure. For the way this reads is for author 005, author 1005. The books that he was involved with sold $896,000. That's his share. But there's a royalty figure that we had in the database as well. So we actually had a second calculation. Coming back to my calculation area. For some reason my mouse is acting a little peculiar here. I'm having trouble tabbing around, so bear with me just a second here. Here we go. So I've got another calculation here called royalty dollars, which is going to take that, essentially that same calculation for the author dollars, and also bring in, because an author might have had different royalties for different books, we're going to take the average for any one royalty instance, and that'll be the royalty dollars. Again, when we get into DAX in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about DAX more in detail, but essentially we're taking the same calculation for the author dollars and applying the author royalty to it. So I will copy and paste this and go back to my content database. And I'm actually going to do this one in the bridge table itself. This calculation, because I am directly dealing with the bridge table itself, need to go to the bridge table. So we get to the bridge table here. So I'm going to go all the way out to books to authors. And I'm going to put a calculation out here in the bridge table for the author dollars, because that's directly dealing with the royalty figure. So that'll be my royalty dollars. I will bring that in. Now that, because every royalty is 25%, that number should be 25% of the grand total of sales, and it actually is. Well, I will format that as currency. And I'll come back to my full-blown spreadsheet. Popping up here. Here we go. And once again, that data needs to be refreshed. And now I can take a look at the actual author dollars where the royalty is factored in. So I'll go up to my bridge table and I'll check the royalty dollars. Now in each instance, the royalty dollars are about a quarter of the author dollars. So again, author 005 here, his contribution to the books was $896,000. So even though the book might have sold $2 million, his contribution to it was $896,000. And off of his piece of the book, he gets 25% royalty. So here's his royalty dollars. So some DAX code is actually needed in order to make many-to-many relationships happen. Now over here on the right-hand side, there's a message that says relationship may be needed. Well, let's take this and see what it does. So I'll take create here, not pretending not to know what's actually going to happen. And this establishes a relationship. So it detected a relationship, and let's see what it actually did. Well, it wound up associating the customer PK and DIM customers with the author PK and DIM authors. Well, if your gut reaction is, that doesn't make any sense, well, your first gut reaction is correct. This is wrong. The problem is the bridge table relationship and the way it's set up in PowerPivot is such that the engineer believes that there should be a relationship when in fact there should not be. Well, if I actually close this, that actually winds up really skewing the numbers because there is no relationship between author and customer. So what we need to do is actually go back to the content database and go into the diagram view. And we see that it built a relationship here between authors and customers. Folks, that one doesn't make any sense. So, but bless PowerPivot, it tried to help us out by creating a relationship, but that relationship should not be there. So let me right-click and just delete that relationship. Well, then if I go back to the spreadsheet itself and refresh the data, so I'll go to options and take refresh. Now the numbers are back to the way we expected. Now a couple of other quick things here, and then I want to push this up into SharePoint. I'm going to go back to the content database under the hood here. A few other features that are available. If I go over to the advanced area, there's a ability to create what are called perspectives. We might have some people who, when they take a look at this content database, only need to look at maybe certain fact tables and certain dimensions. So we can actually establish a perspective, give it a name. Actually, we can create multiple perspectives and actually decide which dimensions and which measures inside of which fact tables we want to either let the user see or not see. So this is like a structural view of the content database. And again, we can create as many perspectives as we need for end users. So I'll take cancel out of there. Now the last thing I want to show here is pushing this up into SharePoint. I'm actually going to go back to the actual spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to take the first two sheets, returns and authors, and I'm going to push them up into a SharePoint site collection. Now, first of all, I need to have a site collection established. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Central Administration in SharePoint. And so we've got about 5 minutes left here. I'm going to go to Central Administration in SharePoint. And in SharePoint, I'm going to create a specific site collection for PowerPivot content. So I'm going to go to Create Site Collections in my local instance of SharePoint here. And I'm going to call it MS Webcast PowerPivot. And site will be the same name. And I'm going to create it as a PowerPivot site. Now I need to provide an administrator, and that'll just be me. And click OK. And that'll create a site collection. That'll take just a second here. And I'm going to actually push this up into SharePoint to show how others could possibly interact with it. And that's and then that'll be it for the day. So just one last step here. So that's creating a site collection. Give this just a second here. And I'll go launch that collection. Now in that site collection that's about to pop up here in just a second, there's going to be a special document library. Just as soon as we see this here. Here's our special site collection, and there's a special document library called a PowerPivot gallery. Now there's nothing in here right now. I'm going to go to the library area, and I'm going to actually take the option to connect to Office, because I want that Excel spreadsheet to be able to point directly to this area. So I'm going to connect to Office. I'm going to add to SharePoint sites. This is a nice little feature that allows Excel to know about this site collection. So that's been added. I'm going to go back to Excel here, and I'm going to click the File drop-down and take the option to Save and Send, and save to SharePoint. And notice how and interestingly, that did not do, unless my eyes are deceiving me. Go back to my site collection here, 1 second. Did not do what I expected, because that should have added. I may have to point to this manually. Normally, that'll create a reference to it. That might not have, and don't want to try to troubleshoot it here. So back in the spreadsheet, if that doesn't recognize, I'll just paste the URL in. So once again, I'm going to take Save and Send, save to SharePoint, and okay, there it is, MS Webcast. It wasn't there a second ago. Now it's there. And I'll actually select that location. and that's going to prompt me to save that up here. Now I'll call this book sales content. This is actually going to push just those two sheets. I'm going to say just push those two sheets, the returns and the authors, up to that site collection. Now that's pushing the spreadsheet along with the compressed version of the data. It is disconnected from the original source data. So if that original source data changes, it won't automatically refresh up in the PowerPivot content that's deployed up into SharePoint, although we can set up a refresh schedule for it, and we'll talk about that next week. So almost done here. Just want to show this up in the site collection. So that should load the site collection here in just a second. Actually, if I go to the PowerPivot gallery right now, it should show up. So let me refresh that PowerPivot gallery. And that's actually still in the process of being pushed up. So that's why we see the hourglass here. So we'll give it another second. It can take a few seconds even on a local machine here. Okay, so here's the page where it was trying to launch. So I'll go launch that. So that's the page it was trying to launch. Well, I'll come back to the PowerPivot gallery. And there's that actual content. Now we can do different things in here. We can actually change the display. I can change it from a gallery to more of a carousel display. And so we can actually flip through these. When this is built with more attractive charts and more attractive visualizations, this looks really cool in production, although it certainly looks pretty nice here. Well, I'll go into that first one for the returns. This is an end user interacting with this up in SharePoint, even if the end user doesn't have Excel. An end user can interact with this if this is using nothing more than a browser and access to SharePoint. Well, I'll change the years here. I'll change the distribution center. So I'll change this to distribution centers. Now there is a first-time refresh here that can take a few seconds. I've only got 8 gig of memory here running both server-based software and desktop-based software, so it's using up quite a bit of resources here. So the first-time refresh can take a few seconds. But an end user can now interact with this as if they were interacting with a web page that was going against an OLAP database. So quite a bit that we were able to do using PowerPivot in Excel. So just another second here for this to refresh. Okay, so that obviously changed the numbers. And if I go back to Internet, the refresh here the second time should be faster. And if I pick 06, well, that changed the numbers as well. Now, last thing here. In that PowerPivot gallery, notice how in the upper right corner there are some icons here. This is going to be a segue into next week. We've done more than just publish a spreadsheet up into SharePoint that has some pivot tables in it. We've done much more than that. We have deployed an analytic database, a PowerPivot analytic database up into SharePoint. We can do things like access it with the new reporting services data visualization tool in SharePoint called PowerView. I'm not going to go into this. I'm going to save this for later, but end users can utilize this new PowerView visualization tool to create reports against that same data we just published up here, even if we didn't make it directly part of the sheet. Or we can set up a refresh schedule. We can actually set up a refresh schedule so that when the data in that relational database changes, that'll actually change the content database up here. So quite a bit that we've seen here today, and more that we're going to see in subsequent weeks. So coming back to my slide deck here, so we'll wrap this up, so I appreciate everybody hanging around. Coming back to my slide deck. We've looked at a PowerPivot example We built some DAX expressions. We built multiple worksheets based on a single PowerPivot model. We built a bridge table relationship. Well, next week in this two-part series, we're going to get into part 2, and we're going to talk more about SharePoint integration. We're going to talk more about what other things we can do with this content database. We can build reporting services, reports off of it. Going to look at maybe a little bit more DAX code. Going to look at building a hierarchy. I wasn't able to get to that today, so we'll look at that next week. It's actually not that difficult. We can build hierarchies with drag and drop operations. So next week we'll look at part 2, and then the week after that we're going to take a look simply at DAX 2.0. We're going to look at DAX formulas, and then rounding out the rest of this 13-part series, going to take a look at the new reporting services integration capabilities with SharePoint, and then the last week we're going to look at that new Power View tool that I referenced a minute ago, the new SharePoint visualization capability that we can use to go against PowerPivot and tabular model databases. So that is it for the day. Again, go to my website for the registration links for next week, or to pull down slide decks. It's www.kevinsgoff.net. My email address is kgoff@kevinsgoff.net. I appreciate everybody hanging around. Sorry for the technical difficulties this week. Hopefully won't happen next week. So. Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend, and see you next week. Same time, almost same station, and we'll look at part 2 of PowerPivot. So that's a wrap. Have a good weekend, and hopefully see you here next week. Thank you.